hotspots that were at war. I think a very big one was India and Pakistan, because you're talking about two nuclear nations. That was a very big one. But and we get help from the UK. The Prime Minister's help. We have cases where we specifically need the help because somebody comes from here that you're aware of, and you know, when you come from a country, you can do things, and I call up the Prime Minister, and all of a sudden, he's able to do things. True also with other presidents and prime ministers, but we've done it. Nobody's ever done what we've done. We have 6 different major if you take a look at Rwanda and the Congo, Republic of the Congo, they've been fighting for 31 years, 8 million people dead. It was going on. Nobody could go to that part of Africa. They were being killed. If to even walk there, you're being killed with machetes. And it was a violent situation. And I was able to, they liked Trump. They wanted to make a trade deal with Trump. They wanted us to take their rare earth. They want to give us their rare earth. And I got to know the leader of the Congo. I got to know both of them indirectly. And I called them. I said, let's end the war. I don't want anything until you end the war. And we ended the war. As you know, the foreign ministers came up 2 weeks ago, and the leaders are going to be coming very shortly to Washington, Rwanda and Congo. I mean, that's another one that we did. So we've done a lot. It's an honor to do it. It's not hard for me to do it. And I use, not in all cases, but I use a combination of knowing them a little bit, or in some cases knowing them a lot. I knew, you know, the leaders of Pakistan and India, I know them very well. And, you know, they're in the midst of a trade deal, and yet they're talking about nuclear weapons. I say, this is crazy. So I said, I'm not doing a trade deal with you guys. And they want the trade deal. They need it. I'm not doing a trade deal with you if you're going to have war. And that's a war that spreads to other countries. You'll get nuclear dust. We'll all get nuclear dust. When they start using nuclear weapons, that stuff blows all over the place, and really bad things happen. So maybe we're being a little selfish when we want to save wars too, but we stopped a lot of wars, and it's a great honor to have done it. Thank you all very much. We're going to be talking inside very much about Gaza and the humanitarian aspects of Gaza.
Yeah. Mr. President, what about Russia and Ukraine? You're talking about ceasefires for solutions.
I would have said 5 times we would have had a deal. I've spoken to President Putin a lot. I got along with him very well, but 5 times, and every time 4 times maybe, but we've had discussions, you and I have had discussions. Yeah. We thought we had that settled numerous times, and then President Putin goes out and starts launching rockets into some city like Kiev and kills a lot of people in a nursing home or whatever. You have bodies lying all over the street. And I say, that's not the way to do it. So we'll see what happens with that. I'm very disappointed. I'm disappointed in President Putin, very disappointed in him. So we're going to have to look, and I'm going to reduce that 50 days that I gave him to a lesser number, because I think I already know the answer what's going to happen. Okay? Thank you very much, everybody. We'll see you later.
So there you have it. There you have it. President Trump and Sir Keir Starmer entering the buildings behind me here at Turnberry in Ayrshire, President's Golf Course. A range of remarks. Unfortunately, we had trouble listening to the start of what they were talking about because the bagpipe was blaring very loudly over them as they spoke. Somebody's probably going to have some words said to them about that. But we did get to hear a little bit afterwards from the Prime Minister and the President. Asked questions about a range of subjects. They talked a lot about the situation in Gaza, which of course they're going to be discussing in a bit more detail. Mr. Trump saying he still holds out hope for a ceasefire, saying that Hamas were unwilling to talk in the end. He talked a little bit about the hostages who are still being held. Sir Keir Starmer talking about how he's working with Jordan to try and get much-needed humanitarian aid to the territory. The President was asked a question by someone about whether he thought that children in Gaza were dying of hunger, whether they were hungry. And he said he didn't agree with remarks from the Israeli Prime Minister that that wasn't the case. He said, yes, those children do look very hungry. Sir Keir Starmer there talking about what people are seeing on their screens and the dire humanitarian situation on the ground there as well. So the pair of them both said that that is going to be something they're going to be discussing on the agenda. Two slightly different tracks here really on that. One is just making sure that aid can get safely to the people who need it, with so many children as well dying of hunger in the territory right now, and also talking about efforts to broker a ceasefire, because at the moment they have stalled and the US has pulled out of those negotiations at the moment. That happened at the tail end of last week. I'm going to bring Katie Balls in from the Times newspaper, who was also watching that with us. Of course, Katie, we couldn't hear the remarks at the top, as I explained, because of the bagpipe. But let's talk about the Gaza talks, because clearly some diverging views there when we heard from both leaders just now.
Yes, and yet an effort by Keir Starmer to praise Donald Trump, saying, "Oh, Mr. President, you've led on the humanitarian efforts." So still attempting some diplomacy or a diplomatic approach when it comes to the conversation that we know that Keir Starmer wants to have. Keir Starmer wants to push the US president to go even further when it comes to playing a role in negotiating a ceasefire, and also in terms of getting humanitarian support to Gaza. And we saw how it went for Emmanuel Macron when he was talking about recognising Palestinian statehood. When those comments were put to Donald Trump by journalists a few days ago, he praised Emmanuel Macron to a degree, but also said he's pretty irrelevant to that, and that might be for the best, was the gist of what he was saying. So he didn't have much time for effectively the European leader pushing that view. Will Keir Starmer have much more luck? I think he's going for a more soft approach, and probably more for tangible wins than getting into the statehood question today. And we saw a little bit of that from the pre-comment talks with the journalists.
Yeah, Katie, one thing that struck me really, I mean, it's unsurprising. We've seen so many of these remarks that Sir Keir Starmer, that Donald Trump, I should say, does before he goes in to meet world leaders. And he does dominate the room, doesn't he? But there were times where I felt that Sir Keir Starmer looked a little bit awkward even.
Yes, and I think it's quite common for the other party to look a little bit awkward in these events, because, as you say, it is the Donald Trump show. He is calling the shots. There's obviously always been the case where the US president in these conversations holds probably more cards to play than the European counterpart. But also because it is Donald Trump, he has this this personality where he leads the conversation too. And you saw at times Keir Starmer felt he needed to chip in. So, for example, when freedom of speech was raised, Keir Starmer very quickly went in and said, well, we've got a great history in our country of that, obviously trying to avoid a situation where Donald Trump was critical of it.
OK, Katie Balls from the Times newspaper, thank you very much for the moment. I'm Regina Vaidyanathan, live from Turnberry. This is BBC News.
Live from London, this is BBC News. Donald Trump welcomes Sir Keir Starmer to his golf course in Scotland as the two men are meeting now for talks.
The pair are expected to discuss the ongoing humanitarian crisis in Gaza, the war in Ukraine, and refine a trade agreement between the US and the UK.
A further 14 people die from malnutrition in Gaza. The UN welcomes Israel's easing of restrictions, but says the new aid is just a drop in the ocean.
The next few days are really make or break. We need to deliver at a much, much greater scale. We need vast amounts of aid going in much faster.
Thailand and Cambodia agree a ceasefire to end 5 days of fighting along their border. At roaring into Downing Street, England's Lionesses are due for an official reception to celebrate their Euro glory. Hello, I'm Lucy Hawkins. Welcome to BBC News Now. We're going to start in Scotland, where Sir Keir Starmer is meeting Donald Trump at the US President's Turnberry golf course in South Ayrshire. Let's show you the moment the media was waiting for. You can hear the pipes going strongly there, but the two leaders meeting there, shaking hands. Victoria Starmer is there accompanying her husband as well. They talked to the media a bit and covered all sorts of things. The conflicts in Gaza came up, trade, Ukraine as well. And after the talks, the two men will leave Mr Trump's luxury golf resort in Turnberry on the west coast of Scotland. They're then going to travel on together to a second sprawling estate owned by Mr Trump in the east near Aberdeen. We're going to take you to Rajini Vaidyanathan, who is at Turnberry for us. Rajini, we're going to get on to talking about Gaza and what was said in a moment when we could hear what was said over the bagpipes. But just one important thing that I picked up listening to the very end of those remarks made by President Trump. He was talking about how disappointed he was in President Putin after the numerous talks they've had when it comes to Ukraine. And he really teased there that he might end this 50-day ceasefire that he gave Russia when it comes to coming up with a ceasefire, suggesting perhaps that these secondary sanctions against Russia could be imposed slightly earlier. So this is one of the first times we've heard that from President Trump. I thought that was interesting when it came to Ukraine and that question coming to him at the very end from journalists. What did you pick up on, though, Rajini, when it comes to Gaza in particular?
Yeah, I mean, there were quite a few questions and remarks and responses on the situation in Gaza, for example. I'm going to bring my colleague, our political correspondent, Damien Grammaticus, in to discuss that area of the remarks that we heard. Damien, we heard from President Trump there saying there's still a willingness for a ceasefire, but he did say that Hamas really were unwilling to talk. He also talked about the hostages more than perhaps he was asked about the humanitarian aid. It was Keir Starmer who talked about that in a bit more detail. Just tell us where you saw some of the possible divergence between the two men when it comes to the way forward in Gaza.
Well, look, I think there's a clear divergence, isn't there, on the issue on the issue, in fact, probably better, Rajini, I'd say actually to focus on where there might be some progress, if you like, from the UK view, in fact, because I think, interestingly, President Trump did talk about that issue of ceasefire and aid flows, and he did say we have to get food and safety right now. And he's talking about Gaza, and that's a key kind of pressing point that that the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer wants to sit and talk to Donald Trump about. We know there's, in a briefing earlier, just a little bit earlier here, Downing Street, Prime Minister spokesperson has talked about the fact we're going to get this cabinet meeting is being summoned back. The top ministers from their break, they're going to be here this week. All talking about Gaza. It's on the table there, talking about aid, and then also the pressure on the government, talking about recognition. Now, what Keir Starmer is pushing there is this idea, first of all, ceasefire, getting more aid in, and then a sort of what they call a pathway to peace. So kind of laying out a process which would try to secure a ceasefire and then make that permanent, and then that would open up moves towards a peace and a two-state solution. So that is where he wants to press Donald Trump, and Donald Trump did sound sort of open to that. He said, we'll be talking about Gaza and about a humanitarian deal. And he said at the beginning, we want to make the Prime Minister happy, and what he called the First Lady, Keir Starmer's wife, Lady Starmer. So on all of those things sounding sort of receptive, even if, of course, there is sort of distance between the two sides on that.
OK, Damien Grammaticus in Downing Street for the moment. Thank you very much. Well, let's have a listen to a little bit of the questioning around Gaza.
Mr. President, Prime Minister Netanyahu said there's no starvation in Gaza. Do you agree with that assessment?
I don't know. I mean, based on television, I would say not particularly, because those children look very hungry. But we're giving a lot of money and a lot of food, and other nations are now stepping up. I know that this nation is, right?
It's
here.
a humanitarian crisis.
Right.
It's an absolute catastrophe.
Do you think
nobody wants to see that, and I think people in Britain are revolted at seeing what they're seeing on their screens. So we've got to get to that ceasefire, and thank you, Mr. President, for leading on that, and also to just get more and more aid in. And again, America's done a lot on this. A lot of countries have done a lot. We're now working with Jordan on getting direct aid drops in, but this is a desperate situation.
We're obviously closely following, Regini, what comes out of this, with President Trump as well also saying that Israel may have to do things a different way. They have to get food and safety right now because those children look hungry, he said. So that's expected to be really top of the agenda in these talks. But can you update us, Regini, on what's expected when it comes to trade?
Yeah, now trade is a big one for both nations. Now, we know, Lucy, that the UK got a special deal, I guess you could call it, when it came to trade, because it was the first country to secure an agreement over tariffs with the United States. And it was seen as a bit of a victory, really, for the British Prime Minister. But as they try and refine that deal in the buildings behind me, there are some sticking points. And I think the biggest one is when it comes to tariffs on steel and aluminium. Now, you may remember initially President Trump imposed those worldwide tariffs on steel and aluminium of 25%. He then said a few months later that they would go up to 50%. But the UK did not have to rise its tariff level, so the UK stays at 25%. But for many steel manufacturers here in the UK, 25% is, of course, still too high. And they want to bring that down to 0%. And I think there was some expectation that perhaps over the course of the months that followed that agreement, the British Prime Minister would be able to renegotiate that or try and bring it down. And so that is certainly the feeling from the steel community here in the UK, that that is a priority, that is a focus for the Prime Minister, given that there is a huge market that goes from the UK to the US when it comes to steel, the biggest market, in fact.
And Regini, what about the deal that was struck with the EU? Mixed reaction in Europe. We're getting quite a few trade and finance ministers coming through expressing their dismay, but some saying it's better to have a deal than none at all at this stage. Is it really being seen as a win for the US, this deal?
There's no doubt about it. If you see the Vice President posting on X yesterday, JD Vance, he was certainly very, very happy, doing a victory lap on social media about all of this. And I think that's because on Friday, when we saw President Trump at Prestwick Airport, not too far from here, just outside Glasgow, when he landed, he did the same thing. He always delivers those remarks. And one of the things he said, because it had just been announced at that point that Ursula von der Leyen from the European Commission was going to be coming to Turnberry as well. It was a last-minute addition to the agenda. He said at that point, Lucy, that he thought there was a 50-50 chance of an EU-US trade deal. And he said at the point there as well that there would be a number of sticking points that they would have to overcome. So it wasn't the most optimistic assessment of whether they would get through this. And we know, of course, Lucy, there are many European countries who have had reservations about giving too much up to the United States. But then on Sunday evening, in the building behind me, we saw Ursula von der Leyen and President Trump speak after they had announced they had managed to agree a deal between the two. They were only in talks for about an hour or so, so it was a quick conclusion. And they got that 15%, so they reduced the overall tariffs for most goods, which were set at 30%, down to 15%, which is seen as a big win. But many people might argue, in other European countries, as you were saying, that perhaps Ursula von der Leyen sold out in this, and that Donald Trump really did carry all of this. He has a way of getting people to come to his doorstep and winning all the arguments, all the agreements. And that certainly seems to be the case, because everyone's coming to this small corner of Scotland to meet him. And remember, this isn't even a state or official visit.
Absolutely, Regini, good to see you. We'll see Regini throughout the day. After they leave Turnberry, they're travelling on together to a second estate that Donald Trump owns in the east, near the city of Aberdeen. But the significant things that President Trump has just said when it comes to Gaza particularly, he says that he thinks that there could be a ceasefire, that could be possible. We know that that is what Sir Keir Starmer will be pushing for when he talks to him today, but also just more on the humanitarian situation. So let's bring you up to date on what is actually happening on the ground in Gaza today. The UN's aid chief, Tom Fletcher, welcoming Israel's decision to allow more aid, but says the 100 or so truckloads going into Gaza are just a drop in the ocean of what is needed. He stressed that the next few days were make or break as Gaza bids to avert mass starvation. Health officials say a further 14 people have died from malnutrition in the last 24 hours. Well, on the first day of the pause, we saw chaotic scenes, people gathering around trucks moving through designated humanitarian corridors. Supplies also dropped from the air by Jordan and from the UAE. Our international editor Jeremy Bowen is on a plane that's going from Jordan, carrying air supplies for an airdrop into Gaza. And just before they took off, he sent us this.
The aircraft are loaded. They're about to take off from just outside Amman in Jordan to Gaza. Now, a couple of things. First of all, there are 2 aircraft here. I think 8 tons each of relief supplies. Yes, not bad, but there are 2 million, more than 2 million starving civilians inside Gaza, and so this is not going to change a great deal. What it is symbolic. It's going to look good on television. It's going to give the impression of things being done. But actually, in reality, the only thing that's going to change things on the ground in Gaza in a humanitarian sense, and the UN has said this and others, is a sustained series, constant series, 24/7 of road convoys bringing in what they need, and there is no assurance of that from the Israelis at the moment. Why have the Israelis, despite their insistence that their regulations have not stopped relief supplies going in, an argument, by the way, that the British and many European governments and others don't agree with, why are the Israelis allowing this? It's because of pressure. Pressure on them from allies about the humanitarian situation in Gaza. And it's something that the ultranationalist right in Israel is very uncomfortable about. But anyway, they're going to be shutting the doors soon, and we're going to go off towards Gaza. A bit of a roundabout route because the Israelis do not allow a direct flight across their territory.
The humanitarian director at Save the Children, Rachel Cummings, has been speaking to us from Deir Bala, that's in central Gaza, and told us what she is seeing there.
The situation is grave. It's catastrophic in Gaza for children and their families. And yesterday I went to our clinic in Deir Bala, and it was scenes or stark in terms of the children and their status. Every child in that clinic was malnourished, and their caregiver, their mother, the adults are desperately thin. My team are desperately thin and literally crying yesterday because they know there is so much more they need to do, but we are so limited in what we are able to do. As I drove back from the clinic yesterday, we went through the market in Deir Bala and it was empty. The market, which is normally 10, 12 stalls selling fruit, vegetables, whatever's around, it was empty yesterday. So the situation here is absolutely desperate now. The airdrops are a distraction. They're not safe. They're not dignified. We know that from previous where children were killed by the airdrops. What we need is sustained humanitarian supplies into Gaza. You know, up to March, there were around 600 trucks a day entering Gaza. We need to get to that level, 300, 400 trucks to bring in food and nutrition commodities to treat children who are already malnourished. We have reached a tipping point in Gaza, and now the exponential increase in the number of children who are malnourished, the number of adults who are malnourished, which is really a yardstick for the situation here. Children have been protected by their families throughout this by feeding children first. Women eat last. We know all of these coping mechanisms, but now those coping mechanisms are completely exhausted and the whole of Gaza is at risk of starvation.
Let's bring you more now from Yulan Nala, correspondent in Jerusalem, with this update on Israel's pause in military operations.
These 3 areas in Gaza City and Al-Muwasi and Deir Bala. So across the Gaza Strip, there were supposed to be these local tactical pauses. We've also been hearing that more aid planes have taken off from Jordan, supposed to be bringing aid to Gaza for airdrops over the Strip. After about 25 tons were dropped by Jordan and the United Arab Emirates one day ago. And earlier, the Israeli military authority that controls the crossing said it was something like 120 lorry loads of aid that were crucially picked up by the UN and other aid agencies from inside Gaza for distribution yesterday. But what we heard from the UN's aid chief is that most of the food in those lorries was actually looted by desperately hungry people. So he's been calling for security and bureaucratic constraints to be lifted as a result of all of that. On the ground, we are hearing that there have been more lorry loads of aid reaching hungry people, but the warnings come through that what's going through at the moment is just a trickle of what is needed, and that people in Gaza remain on the verge of starvation and famine.
You'll learn now there around the world and across the UK. This is BBC News. England's Lionesses are heading home from Switzerland after retaining their European Championship title last night, beating Spain on penalties. We've seen the squad boarding a bus in the last hour for the airport in Zurich, their new piece of excess baggage in tow. Formal celebrations are going to kick off. There's going to be a reception at Downing Street this afternoon before an open-top bus parade through central London tomorrow. To remind you of how it happened, the Lionesses came from behind at half-time to hold the world champions to a 1-1 draw before a stunning penalty shootout. Goalkeeper Hannah Hampton made 2 super saves, while Chloe Kelly, who scored the winner at Wembley 3 years ago, sealed the deal for England once again. This was the moment fans watching at Box Park here in London saw their team make sporting history. They're the first England side to win a major trophy on foreign soil and the first to successfully defend a title. Let's have a listen to Chloe Kelly. She struck that winning penalty and had this to say after the match.
Yeah, I just came onto the pitch and wanted to make something happen, and I know Lester's strengths and tried to put the ball in her head, and then of course taking the penalty. I actually missed 3 penalties in training yesterday. But yeah, I think it's the belief in this squad, whole 23 players and the people that you don't see behind the scenes, the staff members, to get us through this tournament. Yeah, I'm really proud to be English right now, and I'm proud to be part of an amazing group of girls.
The England manager, Serena Wiegman, said they didn't make it easy for themselves.
I must admit that I always think this is the most chaotic and ridiculous tournament we have played. And every time we could come back, because in quarter-final, semi-final, now in the final we came behind. But this, of course, we have players that have talent. And the togetherness of this team is really, really incredible, but also the belief that we can come back and that the players say we can win by any means, and we just never, ever give up.
A few hangovers in Basel, I'm sure. Emma Vardy is there for us.
I've seen a few England fans walking around with sore heads. It's pretty wet too, but I don't think that's dampened their spirits. This, the old town of Basel, was the scene of celebration last night as fans poured out of the stadium. They came down here to the bars, to the restaurants, to the square, which was the big fan zone, and they really enjoyed the night. But the morning after, we'll take a look. They're all sheltering in this British pub in here. They've been having a few English breakfasts, and bacon sandwiches have been served up there this morning, because of course as the England players are getting on their team coach and they're heading back on the plane to London, well, the England fans here too, they're just packing up the rest of their things, and most of them are heading off to the airport, if they're not already there now this morning, to make the journey back. And of course for the Lionesses, well, they don't just get to go home and relax just yet. They're heading off to Downing Street this afternoon, and then tomorrow they get to really let their hair down with the open top bus parade. And I know England fans who are here for the match, they're trying to get back in time too, so that they can come out on the streets of London and enjoy seeing the England players lift that trophy from the open-top bus for their victory parade tomorrow, and it will all culminate in a celebration outside Buckingham Palace tomorrow afternoon. So the morning after the night of the victory, but lots more still to look forward to celebrate over the next 24 hours.
Emma Vardy there in Basel will be following the Lionesses as they return here to London and to Downing Street throughout the day, so stay with us for that. We have breaking news to bring you that Thailand and Cambodia, the two neighbours, have agreed an unconditional ceasefire to end days of fighting along their border. Now, these are the two leaders shaking hands at the end of a press conference in Malaysia. That's where the talks happened, announcing the pause in the violence. It will come into effect midnight local time. President Trump had warned both sides that he wouldn't sign a trade deal with either countries until a ceasefire had been agreed. At least 33 people have been killed, thousands displaced since last Thursday when fighting escalated following months of tensions. Each side has been blaming the other for causing the escalation. But this is a dispute that dates back more than a century when their borders were drawn following the French occupation of Cambodia. Jonathan Head, our Southeast Asia correspondent, has the latest for us on this unconditional ceasefire.
Well, I think this deal came a great deal more quickly than expected. The mood in the morning after these talks were announced was still quite uneasy. The Thai side were not talking with great enthusiasm about them, and Thailand has not been willing to accept a ceasefire since Cambodia asked for one last Friday. The Thai position is they still don't believe Cambodia is sincere about peace. They're very angry about the continued fairly indiscriminate rocket attacks that have been coming over the border from the Cambodian side, which have hurt a lot and killed a lot of civilians on the Thai side. And the Thai military, which is much more powerful than Cambodia's, has been pushing Cambodian forces back and does not view the job as finished. But I think in the end, it has to be that threat from President Trump to stop trade talks, which finally forced Thailand's hand and decided that it must agree to a ceasefire very quickly. It's hard to overstate how critical these talks are to both Cambodia and Thailand. They're very exposed. They rely very heavily on exports to the US. Both are facing 36% tariffs from the US if they can't negotiate them down. And remember, the deadline is Friday. There are very intense trade talks going on. The thought that those talks could be suspended if they didn't stop the fighting, I think, was a great threat to their economies, to their governments too. Their governments need to show their own people that they can get a deal, as several of their neighbours already have. So that probably changed the mood. I wouldn't say either the Thai or Cambodian Prime Minister looked particularly sort of cheerful at this meeting in Malaysia, but they both agreed to honour the ceasefire. The real critical job now is to make it happen. Fighting is supposed to stop at midnight local time. That will be a huge relief to the people living along the border on both sides. Tens of thousands are displaced. It's been a really terrible experience under these bombardments, so they'll be very relieved. But the two armies are still right up against each other, still skirmishing. Even as the talks were going on, there were shells and rockets coming across, and there's a great deal of mistrust and a lot of anger, a lot of nationalist feeling has been stirred up. So it is going to be quite difficult to police that ceasefire. Malaysia has offered to help monitor it and will bring in other Southeast Asian countries to do that. It's not clear yet how much both Cambodia and Thailand are willing to allow outsiders to come in and monitor it, but that's what will be necessary. And it will be necessary to persuade their forces to move back from the disputed border, which has been enormously reinforced in recent days. Those are going to be big challenges. And given the mood between the two countries and the anger that's been stirred up over the past 5 days of fighting, I think it's going to be quite a tough job to make the ceasefire stick.
The head monk of China's Shaolin Temple is being stripped of his robes. Shi Yongxin is under investigation for alleged embezzlement and improper relations with women, including claims he fathered a child. After taking over in 1999, he turned the temple into a global commercial empire. China's top Buddhist authority has revoked his clergy certificate as a criminal probe into this deepens. Our China correspondent Steve McDonnell has more from Beijing.
When Shi Yongxin took over as abbot at the Shaolin Temple, he took it immediately in a very commercial direction, and the movies, the stage shows, the millions of tourists coming to China to see the temple are all testament to this. The Shaolin Temple has become a global marketing success. And so critics of this approach would say they're not surprised that we now have these embezzlement allegations against him. He's long been criticised for taking this important historical and cultural institution and turning it into a shallow money-making exercise. You know, this is a 1,500-year-old temple, they would say, not just something for you to make money from. He, of course, though, has long said there should be engagement with the general public, and therefore he's spreading the good word, as it were. Now, this is not the first time we've seen allegations of corruption, of embezzlement against him. Back in 2015, very similar allegations were levelled. At that time, though, it was all dismissed. And apart from the money, then, as now, he's also accused of having improper relations with several women.
Steve McDonald there in Beijing. Do stay with us here on BBC News. This is BBC News, the headlines. Sir Keir Starmer is meeting with Donald Trump for talks in Scotland. Trade, the Middle East and Ukraine, top of the agenda. The UN welcomes Israel's decision to allow more aid into Gaza, but says it is just a drop in the ocean. And as England Lionesses begin their journey home, we'll be consoling a journalist from the country that they beat. We'll be live in. Hello, I'm Lucy Hawkins. Let's bring you up to date with the talks taking place at the moment at Donald Trump's golf course in Scotland at Turnberry. Sir Keir Starmer arriving there in the past hour with his wife Victoria. And before going inside, the two men addressed the media and watching it from afar, but right across all of the developments is Rajini Vaidyanathan, who we can join now. Rajini, right at the end of that press conference, before going inside, one of the most significant things that I thought came out of it was the talk about Ukraine, with President Trump saying that he was disappointed in President Putin, even though they got on quite well and had spoke numerous times. But what exactly was said about the possibility of this 50-day deadline that he's given to Vladimir Putin to come up with a ceasefire being shortened?
Yeah, I mean, basically that President Trump did basically say that he could look into making that a lesser amount, is what he said. So that could then lead to other implications. What happens if that deadline that's been given to Vladimir Putin is reduced? Does that mean that sanctions that have been threatened as well, additional sanctions, kick in anytime sooner? It's really unclear, but it is significant that the issue of Ukraine, which perhaps has gone off the agenda in terms of what he's been talking about, is firmly in the minds of both leaders as they go into their talks. And we heard from Downing Street earlier before those talks as well, with the British Prime Minister saying that they were going to talk about how they could get Vladimir Putin back to the negotiating table. Let's have a listen to what President Trump had to say.
Mr. President, what about Russia and Ukraine? You're talking about ceasefires. What's the latest?
I would have said 5 times we would have had a deal. I've spoken to President Putin a lot. I got along with him very well. But 5 times, and every time 4 times maybe, but we've had discussions. You and I have had discussions. Yeah. We thought we had that settled numerous times. And then President Putin goes out and starts launching rockets into some city like Kiev, and kills a lot of people in a nursing home or whatever. You have bodies lying all over the street. And I say that's not the way to do it. So we'll see what happens with that. I'm very disappointed. I'm disappointed in President Putin. Very disappointed in him. So we're going to have to look, and I'm going to reduce that 50 days that I gave him to a lesser number, because I think I already know the answer what's going to happen.
Yeah, Donald Trump there. So everyone, Rajini, poring over those comments about whether he will reduce that 50 days, because that, of course, has given, Russia a chance to push ahead with their summer offensive. Of course, the press conference started with lots of talk about Gaza, though. Just remind us what was said not only by President Trump, but by Keir Starmer.
Yeah, I mean, we know that Gaza is high on the agenda in these discussions, and President Trump reiterated that as they were going into their meeting. He was asked by a journalist whether he agreed with the Israeli Prime Minister's assessment that there is no starvation in Gaza, and he said that he did not agree with that. And he said, I would say, not particularly, because those children look very hungry on TV. But what I think was quite striking, we might be able to play this in a second, was Sir Keir Starmer then jumping in and saying, well, actually, this is a humanitarian crisis. And in a way, it shows you very subtly, and we're going to watch it in a second, the slight divergence that the two men have on the urgency that they feel, perhaps, of the crisis when it comes to starvation and malnutrition in the territory. Let's have a listen.
Mr. President, Prime Minister Netanyahu said there's no starvation in Gaza. Do you agree with that assessment?
I don't know. I mean, based on television, I would say not particularly, because those children look very hungry. But we're giving a lot of money and a lot of food, and other nations are now stepping up. I know that this nation is, right?
It's
here.
a humanitarian crisis.
Right.
It's an absolute catastrophe.
Do you think
nobody wants to see that, and I think people in Britain are revolted at seeing what they're seeing on their screens. So we've got to get to that ceasefire, and thank you, Mr. President, for leading on that, and also to just get more and more aid in. And again, America's done a lot on this. A lot of countries have done a lot. We're now working with Jordan on getting direct aid drops in, but this is a desperate situation.
Mr. President, do you think Israel has done all it can do to avoid civilian casualties in Gaza?
Well, I think nobody's done anything great over there. The whole place is a mess. It'll get straightened out, but it's a mess. They have to get food and safety right now. And ultimately, look, Hamas did a horrible thing, and they paid a big price, but Hamas did a horrible thing. But I always said, when you get down to the last 20 or 10, they're down to 20. We got a lot of hostages out, and you helped us, by the way.
Yeah,
but we got a lot of hostages out over the last 6 months that I've been in. I've been in office for 6 months now. And these hostages have been, many of them have come to the Oval Office and they thanked me so profusely. I said, you don't have to thank me. I did what I have to do. But I always said, when you get down to the final 20, they won't release them because that's like their shield. Very unfair. And so something's going to have to be done. And they were really unwilling to talk. But I've said that. You'll get down to the final 10 or 20. It turns out to be 20. I thought that would be the number. I said, they're not going to be dealing with us. And, many of the hostages are now dead, you know that. And parents come up to me, a woman came up to me 2 weeks ago. She just wants her son back. And I said, how's he doing? My son's dead, sir, but he's with them, and we want the body. She wanted the body of this young boy, of her young, beautiful son, just as much as if he were alive. It was just as important. There was no difference. And it's a tragic situation, frankly. But we get a lot out, and now possibly the fight will have to be a little bit different. But they have totally changed now. They don't want to give hostages. Very unfair. You have 20 living people. In this case, living. You have many dead people too that they want to get out.
A long time as well.
Yeah, they have 20 living people, and I told Israel, I told Bibi that you're going to have to now maybe do it a different way.
Do you think a ceasefire is even possible, Mr. President?
Yeah, a ceasefire is possible, but you have to get it. You have to end it. You're talking about with Israel. You're talking about there, because we have many ceasefires going on. The whole world is.
It's an interesting dynamic, isn't it, Regini, between the two men today in particular, with President Trump hosting Keir Starmer, but in Scotland. And he turned to reporters at one point and said the relationship between the US and the UK is unparalleled. They both seem very comfortable together. They were smiling when they walked into the talks. What did you make of the sort of dynamic between them?
Yeah, let's start with the wider context, as you pointed out, Lucy. It is quite bizarre, isn't it, that you've got a British Prime Minister being hosted in Britain by the US President on his golf course. But things are always unconventional, aren't they, under a Trump presidency? I did think there were moments where Sir Keir Starmer looked a little awkward when President Trump was speaking, particularly on things like Gaza. Obviously, we know that Mr. Trump does dominate the room or any space when he's speaking. So he was speaking mostly, and there were times, as we saw with Gaza, for example, where Sir Keir Starmer felt he had to jump in and clarify that his position wasn't identical to the US President's. Donald Trump has, of course, been full of praise since he returned to office for Keir Starmer, saying he might be a liberal, but he's a very good man, is essentially what he said for a long time. Well, I was asking Katie Balls, the US editor of the Times newspaper, what she made of the dynamic between the pair as they spoke on the steps there. Let's have a listen to what Katie had to say.
An effort by Keir Starmer to praise Donald Trump, saying, oh, Mr. President, you've led on the humanitarian efforts. So still attempting some diplomacy or a diplomatic approach when it comes to the conversation that we know that Keir Starmer wants to have. Keir Starmer wants to push the US president to go even further when it comes to playing a role in negotiating a ceasefire and also in terms of getting humanitarian support to Gaza. And we saw how it went for Emmanuel Macron when he was talking about recognising Palestinian statehood. When those comments were put to Donald Trump by journalists a few days ago, he praised Emmanuel Macron to a degree, but also said he's pretty irrelevant to that and that might be for the best, was the gist of what he was saying. So he didn't have much time for effectively the European leader pushing that view. Will Keir Starmer have much more luck? I think he's going for a more soft approach and probably more for tangible wins than getting into the statehood question today. And we saw a little bit of that from the pre-comment talks of the journalists.
Yeah, Katie, one thing that struck me really, I mean, it's unsurprising. We've seen so many of these remarks that Sir Keir Starmer, that Donald Trump, I should say, does before he goes in to meet world leaders. And he does dominate the room, doesn't he? But there were times where I felt that Sir Keir Starmer looked a little bit awkward even.
Yes, and I think it's quite common for the other party to look a little bit awkward.